Here we go. $12 here, and we are ready to go. Thank you for everyone that is on live with us for today's webinar. My name is Corey Jo Biddle. I'm the Executive Director for Fuel Milwaukee, and today's call is about tomorrow's election. And there's been so much change and shifts and confusion for folks around how to vote, whether absentee or in person, amid the COVID-19 pandemic. We thought that it would be timely and important to bring you the most accurate information that we have right now, so that you can know where to vote and how to vote, and what deadlines you should be adhered to. So thank you all for being here. Tomorrow is a very important day, but we want to make sure we clear as much confusion for folks as possible.
Thank you.
Let me introduce our panelists here. Thank you both for being here. Theo Lipscomb is the chairman of the Milwaukee County Board of Supervisors and the county supervisor representing the 1st district in the county. We also have Representative Jonathan Brostoff of the Wisconsin State Assembly, District 19. Thank you guys. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate you.
How you holding up?
Doing all right.
Doing great. I'm out of quarantine. Had the lovely news of my newest potential addition to the family announced recently, thank God. So happy, healthy, and ready to get through this.
Congrats.
A ray of sunshine amid a lot of confusion right now. So thanks for sharing that on Facebook. That cheered me up this morning. Okay, so before we start going into the questions, I've shared the questions with you, and we're going to have questions that continue to come in during the webinar. I would like to kind of set a little bit of a stage for who you guys are in context, and I think I shared with you a little earlier. Half of Fuel's members aren't from Milwaukee originally. They've come to Milwaukee as a result of being recruited by their employers here. So to give some context and help them understand a little bit more about local government and how you guys sort of sit in that space, I'm going to give you a little bit of opportunity to share what you all do and who you represent. Theo, I'm going to start with you. Kind of let us know a little bit about the county and lawmaking and governing at that level.
Sure. So I represent the 1st district, which is on your screen there in the upper upper middle of the screen is the 1st district. It's a portion of 6 different municipalities. So the county is 19 municipalities. I represent a portion of 6, including the city of Milwaukee, and then 5 North Shore communities. I think what's helpful to understand is that these elections are administered at the local level. They're coordinated by the county, but they are administered in each of the municipalities. So Milwaukee, the city of Milwaukee being the largest, about 60% of the county, but the other 18 communities, villages, and cities that are in the county, they're all running their own process. And so if you're not in the city, the specifics may be a little bit different for you. So county offices are all on the ballot tomorrow. So everyone will be electing a county supervisor for their district, as well as we'll be electing a new county executive. I've been on the board for 12 years, but I am not on the ballot tomorrow. I'm not running for re-election. I was a candidate for county exec, and I am not on the ballot. So that allowed me to participate today. So I'm basically serving in my last 12 days of 12 years in office. So, but proud to be here today.
Thank you. I'm glad to have you here. Jonathan.
Yeah, and I agree. Thanks, Theo. It's been an incredible public servant, and I was there when you were first instated at the county. So staff, I appreciate all your work.
Thank you.
So I'm in the state assembly, and in Wisconsin, for those of you who aren't from here, we, just like the federal system, have a bicameral legislature. So we have an assembly, not the small part due to Theo's dad and some work from his work in the legislature, but we are in the kind of more like the House of Representatives and the Assembly as opposed to the United States Senate and the State Senate. So we have about 55,000 constituents per district. My district, you can see it's the kind of small little dot on the map on the bottom right-hand side. And that's because it's incredibly densely populated. So I have a geographically relatively smaller district, although obviously population is the same as every other one. And mine goes along the lakefront, east side downtown, Bayview, 3rd Ward, a little bit of River West areas. And yeah, I've been serving now, going to my 6th year, which feels like it was just yesterday, but it's been a total honor. And this is an incredibly challenging time. And I want to say, first off, thank you to all of the people on the front lines, whether it's our grocery store workers or healthcare workers, you know, all the people who are putting this incredible amount of work in, because, you know, just for thought, just for everyone watching this to, you know, I had this conversation the other day and didn't really hit me until I thought about it in those terms, but, you know, I'm old enough to remember 9/11 very vividly, and it was a horrible, you know, terrorist incident where a lot of innocent Americans lost their lives, and you know, in one day we lost 2,977 souls. And this morning when I checked, you know, we're already up to 10,327 innocent lives from the coronavirus, so well over 3 times what we lost on 9/11, just for some perspective. And we're not peaked yet. It's likely that this is, you know, going to continue, and we have to I think do what we can to be safe and to treat it in that respect, but also to honor the heroes putting their lives on the line to keep society running, keep people fed, keep people healthy, and also everyone for doing their part to help flatten the curve and do what they need to do. So thank you. And yeah, I'm happy to get into the questions. I got to see some of the questions that folks have posed before, but happy to answer anything. If we don't have time for everyone's right now, you can always contact me afterwards, and you know, Corey, Joe, maybe you can share my info with everyone, but I'm happy to talk through anyone, even if you're not in my district, about anything going on or any suggestions or ideas or questions you have. And last but not least, for my kind of intro on this, in my opinion, this election is incredibly challenging. I don't agree with all the decisions made by the court. I don't agree with all the decisions made by the governor, and I do not agree with the decisions made by the majority party, the Republicans who control the state legislature. In my opinion, and the legislation that I authored on a while ago on this, we should have done an all mail-in ballot. Everyone should have gotten safe access from home. We should have canceled all in-person voting, and we should have made sure that every single person is able to safely access this election, just like they do in Utah and Oregon, in Colorado, Hawaii, and other states. And we do it here. We just could do it for every single person instead of those who opt into it. And I think there should have been an extension. I think for logistical purposes, everyone who wanted to should have been able to mail it in, mail it back. And that's what I proposed. And I think that the way this has been handled, it's likely there's going to be a lot of lawsuits coming out after this, and this is going to carry on for years to come. And it's an unprecedented, but also incredibly messy, and it's going to be hard, and there's a lot of confusion. So thanks to Corey Joe for inviting me. I'm happy to clarify anything for folks that do want up-to-date information.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we have time towards the end, I know that there were some questions that people had about how they can voice their concerns or their opinions about how this was handled. So we'll kind of get to that towards the end. But Jonathan, you spoke about the mail-in ballots. I think we'll start there. There were people who were able to request their absentee ballots before the extended deadline to request them. So let's just kind of talk about that. Let's clear up any misconceptions or confusions around that. I'll kind of lead in with some questions, and you guys, we'll just very informally, please just jump in wherever you have something to say. But some of the thoughts are, is it too late to receive an absentee ballot? When are the absentee ballots due? Because that has changed. If people are have an absentee ballot but are quarantined alone, will they or won't they need a signature, and where and how should they submit those ballots, and by what deadline?
Sure. So first, I think it's helpful for everybody to understand that it's kind of fluid. So we had decisions as recent as Friday, and then an appeal, and portions of the decision were reversed, and there were lawsuits filed over the weekend, even taking this to the Supreme Court. So if either the Supreme Court would take this up, or there would suddenly be a ruling today, tonight, or even tomorrow, some things could change. But as it stands today, the deadline for requesting an absentee ballot has passed. That does not mean that everyone who's requested one already has it. So if it still comes to you, you still have time to submit it, as well as there will be limited in-person voting tomorrow. If you have an absentee ballot, or you get one in the coming days, if you live in the city of Milwaukee, there are 5 drop-off sites that are going to be open through April 13th. So, so you can mail it back. Obviously, it needs to arrive by April 13th. But if you want to make sure that it's deposited, you can take it to one of the drop-off sites. Those are, and you can find these on the City of Milwaukee Election Commission website. There are 5 drop-off sites. They are Zablocki Library, Bayview Library, Washington Park Library, Mill Road Library, and the Zeidler Municipal Building, which is 841 North Broadway. So those are open every day, 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. for drop-off. And they have election officials there who can witness your ballot. So if you live alone and you don't have a witness, that is an option for you. If you've not requested one, though, it is too late to request one, and so tomorrow in-person voting would be your option if you've not already requested an absentee ballot.
There's a question somebody just submitted around this.
Can I hop onto that real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
So sorry. Just one last thing on that. Theo's right, although there's one exception, which is you don't have to submit it if it's sealed and witnessed. Someone else can bring it for you if you're unable to for some reason, or if you know someone else who's unable to. That person has to deliver it. It's illegal not to deliver it once they have it. But if you can't leave your home, or there's something like that, and you don't think it's going to get mailed in time, someone else can do it for you. And I would just recommend, if you are at all able to, don't try going through the mail. Try to drop it off if you can safely. And I've done it, and I've seen it in action, and they are taking really good precautions at this point as far as how that's being handled. But if you can safely do it, I would recommend that. These are kind of uncertain times, and logistically, I think it's a better option. But if you can't, someone else that you give guidance to can, and as long as it's sealed and ready to roll.
That actually speaks right to the question that somebody submitted in the Q&A section. The question is, are there any resources or organizations who are picking up ballots for people who don't have the ability to turn in their absentee ballot due to the quarantine?
Yes, I believe Souls to the Polls is still doing that, and I think that if I remember, again, everything's so fluid, and I'm not getting a ton of sleep these days, but I believe the ACLU is as well. Also, this is something that doesn't necessarily have to be an organization. If you have friends or family, I've been asked to do it for other people. So it doesn't have to be like an official organization, nothing like that. It could just be any lay person in the community. But I believe Souls to the Polls and ACLU are, and I would recommend contacting them. And I can try and get a more comprehensive list if someone wants to ask me offline. I can check around for that.
I'll get the information too, and we can email it to everyone who's on the call here. Another absentee ballot question. What if you requested an absentee ballot, it hasn't come yet in the mail, and so you decide to play it safe and just vote in person tomorrow? Can you do that?
Yes.
Yes, just make sure you don't also submit your absentee ballot.
Yes, don't vote. Definitely don't
vote
vote
twice. But yes.
One or the other, but yes.
And also I would say if you have not yet received it, if then you definitely should consider the drop-off locations. You know, if you haven't mailed it by tomorrow, I mean, talking about a week to get there with slower mail service these days. So I would definitely take that advice on the drop-off.
Because it has to be received by the 13th, not just postmarked,
13th,
right?
about, I think it's 4 o'clock is their deadline, which essentially means Monday's mail.
Okay. Let's get into the in-person voting tomorrow. I think people have, but not everyone realizes that the polling locations have changed and shifted. Maybe we should start there. So as of right now, in-person voting is taking place, but it is very likely that your polling place is different, yes?
Yes. So first off, in-person voting is 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. That is the normal timeline on election day. For the city of Milwaukee, there will be 5 consolidated polling locations. I think you've got that list.
Yeah.
So when you pull that up, so for the city of Milwaukee only, this would be, so you have the 15 aldermanic districts have been divided into 5 polling locations, although there are a couple of weird exceptions. So you want to check that list and or call or visit the city website if you're having trouble, and call if necessary. But you want to, hopefully you can look yourself up off the city website to see which district you're in, and then that would tell you which of these 5 consolidated locations you would go to. So
yes, and I would also just say that some folks might be in the suburbs. Every different municipality is run by different officials and might have a little bit different guidelines or structure. So I would highly recommend contacting your elections officials, and you can call in. I've done it multiple times now, and it's been you have to wait a little bit longer than normal, but it's been a relatively easy process because they're the ones who are ultimately going to have the agency over this and doing all the on the ground work, and so they'll have the most up-to-date information if anything changes or if there are any guidelines or hours or anything like that. So I would highly recommend, depending on which municipality you are, contacting that office directly. And I've only gone through the city of Milwaukee, but they've been really good to work with.
Have you all heard anything about any plans to keep people distanced as we're consolidating a lot of polling places into just a few? So I know that's a huge concern, and I'm just wondering how it's being addressed or what measures that you know of that are in place to keep people safe.
I called about that yesterday for my area, for the city of Milwaukee specifically, and I was told that the guidelines are going to be followed and they're going to do their best to maintain proper hygiene practices, using masks, using the gloves, different sanitization efforts, and specifically extra efforts to sanitize the spaces and equipment. Ultimately, obviously, as I said, it's probably going to vary from municipality to municipality. It might even vary from location to location a little bit, depending on who's in charge. But that's what I was told for Milwaukee. They're only allowing 50 people in at one time, which is what they've deemed to be appropriate as far as the 6 feet rule. But I mean, if you're planning on voting in person tomorrow, I would highly recommend taking as many precautions as possible, not just the hand hygiene, but also maintaining your distance that's at least 6 feet, wearing a mask, covering up as much as possible. This is an incredibly challenging situation, and if we all do our part and follow the CDC guidelines as best we can, we'll be in better shape. But if we don't, I think things could be exacerbated more than they have to be. So that would be my recommendation. It's again, as I said, I personally think there should be no in-person voting, and I think it should have all been done by mail, and we could have done that, and I even wrote the legislation for it, but that's the information we have at the time it is, and that's what the courts have determined as well. So.
With all the changes to the polling places, kind of remind folks what they should be bringing to the polling place to be able to vote. And also, if someone isn't registered, is it too late for them to register in person?
You can still register in person. You can't get your absentee ballot, as Theo said, but you can still register on election day. And to your question, you got to bring a proper photo identification and proof of residence. So that could be state ID, driver's license with your proper address on it, recent utility bill, etc.
Okay, one of the questions is what happens if folks are waiting in line when the pre-scheduled voting hours have ended? If they're in line, can they still vote if everyone hasn't had a chance to vote yet?
Yeah, my expectation would be that the normal rules are followed, which is that if you're in line at 8 o'clock, that you can vote. They would keep it open until the last person votes who was in line at 8 o'clock.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. And that's always been the case.
Mm-hmm.
Another question, with each municipality setting their own rules, how do we ensure the integrity of the electoral process?
Well, just to be clear, that's always the case, that each municipality administers their own local election or administers the election locally, and they're not setting their own rules. They may have variances in what accommodations they're making, but the rules should be uniform across the state in terms of the dates and availability, that sort of thing. So obviously the consolidation of voting places is not uniform. Just as an example, I just looked up City of Glendale, which is where I live, just to see did they consolidate. And as of right now, it looks like they haven't consolidated. So in the City of Glendale, with less than 14,000 people, there are still 6 voting locations. And in the City of Milwaukee, with 600,000 people, there are 5, right? So there are disparate implementation, but the idea of local control has always been an element of the administration of elections.
This is an interesting question. How does the system ensure that people don't vote twice? So this person's question is about if they requested an absentee ballot that hasn't arrived, and then they go to vote in person. Is it on record that they requested an absentee ballot with people questioning them and say, how come you're here and you already have an absentee ballot? How does that work?
I mean, yes, there's a record, and yeah, it would be handled the same way it would be in any other context. There might be a larger volume of absentee. There is a larger volume of absentee requests than we've ever had actually in state history. In fact, more than 1 million, but it's the exact same process as it always would be, and there's a record, so that will not happen, just like in any other election.
So they're out, if they have an absentee ballot requested and it's outstanding, maybe it's lost in the mail, and they go to vote in person, that will not stop them from being able to vote in person.
Exactly.
Right.
The issue would come up if they got that and then they're already on the rolls, and then a piece of mail came in, then it would be invalidated, and but that would trigger a mechanism where it wouldn't count, and that would actually, to my understanding, invalidate both of their. So instead of getting to vote twice, you would get to vote not at all. So it's illegal, and it's also not practically a good idea.
Yep.
I'm not positive if things, there might be some exceptions to the confusion for this time around, but that's my understanding in general.
Now there's some curiosity around the, there was a judgment, right, to extend the deadline for the absentee ballots. Okay, so I think there's been some speculation that this is still up in the air. So the question is it possible for your vote to not count if by chance they change or reverse that decision to extend the April 13th deadline?
Is it possible for your vote not to count?
Like if they change it and say, nope, it's the 7th after all, and yours gets there on the 8th because you thought it was the 13th, will your vote not count in that context?
I suppose a judge could make that ruling, and there are moves being made to get this looked at. There's a lawsuit that was filed pretty immediately by the Republican Party of Wisconsin, or maybe it's the National. Anyway, there's a political group that filed grievance, a couple of them, and I suppose that could be a ruling. And we don't know exactly how everything's going to break because, as Theo said, it's possible we could get more. It's possible we could get. I mean, this is all happening so quickly. We could get something in the next hour. We don't know yet. And the Seventh Circuit ruling came really quickly, and that was the one that changed. Before that, the previous Judge Connolly's ruling allowed for people who were not able to safely get a witness to basically write to their clerks, hey, you couldn't get a witness, for the clerk to deem that acceptable. That was reversed pretty quickly by the Seventh Circuit, where now you have to have a witness, and that is not allowed. So this is all changing very quickly, and that is possible. But at this point, we just have to operate on the information that we have at hand, because the speculations could be infinite, and we just don't know until we know.
I think it's unlikely that they would pull back on the 13th, given that the federal appeals court has upheld it, and that doing so would necessarily put the outcome in, it would keep the outcome in the courts. So, because then there would be a continued court fight over whether to count these late arriving ballots. So I think it's unlikely. Obviously anything's possible.
Right.
But all the more, if you've got the ballot, if you've got your absentee ballot, drop it off at one of the drop-off sites and avoid that. You could drop, they're open today even for the drop-off sites till 1 p.m. And then open again, they say every day, so including election day apparently, for the drop-off at those 5 sites. And then you've got the 5 in-person voting sites tomorrow in the city. Again, if you're not in the city of Milwaukee, if you're in Wauwatosa or Oak Creek or Glendale or Brown Deer or any of these other communities, you'd want to check with your local clerk. And that includes if you're not in the Milwaukee County. If you're outside of Milwaukee County, you're in Waukesha, you should check with the local clerk there to find out what are the provisions in your specific community. It may be on their website, but otherwise you need to call.
We touched on this question a little bit, but I think it probably bears repeating, and you guys can share as much as you know of what is known right now. Again, how will traffic of people be managed to prevent the spread of COVID-19 while people are voting at the 5 locations? This is obviously a Milwaukee specific question.
Well, I don't know that we have the answer other than what Representative Brostoff just said, which is that they're gonna traffic, or they're gonna control how many people are admitted inside the facility. Presumably at any of these locations, they should be doing that, as well as in terms of the crowd. If there's any crowd outside the facility, they should be keeping their distances as well. And a lot of that would require people to act too. It's not just on the administration of those facilities, but people need to keep their distance and be respectful that this is less than ideal, and that the workers don't want to be any closer than they have to either. So hopefully everyone will keep their distances.
Yeah, I mean, I asked that very question and was just told that they're going to follow the guidelines, that they did safety trainings, that they're going to have people in place. They're very aware of the situation. And again, I really don't think they should be placed in it. I think it should be all mailed in, and we have the ability to do that. But under the circumstances, they're just going to do the best that they can. And if you have more specific questions, I would highly recommend contacting the Election Commission to ask them exactly what they'll be doing. And I would also say, again, take as much precautions as you can. Get your mask on, get your face scarfed up, stuff like that. Whatever you can do, get the gloves, This is a global pandemic, and it's the proportions are significant, and the consequences are very real. So we need to do our best under the circumstances.
We got another good question about the, I know over the weekend, as far as I knew, Sunday was the last day to do the drive up voting, but people are kind of wondering, is that still going on? Is there going to be drive up voting available at the municipal building or at any of these 5 polling places in Milwaukee?
It's not my understanding that they will be doing that, but I can double check. That's a good question. I don't believe so, but you can always just drive up if you'd like and physically drop off yours if you did get it, you don't want to send it through the mail yet. So that's still available. But as far as the drive-in voting that they had, I don't believe so. But I might be I might be wrong, or they might be changing that. That's something that I would definitely call the election commission and double check on, because that's something that could change and that they had a lot of success with early on.
Mm-hmm. There's a question about if there is support available for folks who might, in the event that they have problems trying to vote at the polling place. If it's an ID question or a registration question, any problems, are there organizations that folks should call? Are there phone numbers that people could call that will, people are kind of on the ready to answer questions and help resolve issues at polling places?
Election protection.
Yeah, election protection is a great one. In my experience, I always go with the ACLU because they're just really keen into this and fantastic. And Emilio Del Toro is the guy over there to contact, and I would highly recommend having one of those numbers on hand just in case. But hopefully everything will go smooth, but just in case.
So election protection and ACLU.
Given that there are only 5 in the city, they may in fact even have people there trying to provide that. Oftentimes they have done that even when there's been citywide polling, and so I could imagine that with only 5 locations and with this kind of chaos potential, that they would want to be there to try and do that. As much as they don't want to be there, I'm sure they would want to be there at a time like this, because that's when it's most apt to be a problem. The biggest thing though would be to bring that ID and to have that proof of residence, particularly if your ID doesn't match the residence that you're registering for. So
that's a good point.
So that's the best thing you can do to be prepared.
It's a really practical question. I wouldn't have thought about this, but it's smart. Can you bring your own black pen to the polls tomorrow to avoid using a community pen?
Yes.
Okay.
It does, but that's a good point. It does have to be black.
It's got to be a black pen. So bring your black pens, folks. Okay, this one is kind of, this was something I saw in the news too. So to the extent that you can answer or comment, please do. I'm just going to read this question from Doug. He says, on Sunday, it was reported that 10 mayors from across Wisconsin, along with other officials throughout the state, called on State Health Secretary designee Andrea Palm to ban in-person voting during Tuesday's elections due to the coronavirus pandemic. Was there any outcome from this?
So there's a little bit of context for this question, and this was an effort that in some part was spearheaded by former state representative Eric Genrich, who represents the 3rd largest municipality in the state over in Green Bay. And the governor basically declared a state of emergency. The governor declared a state of emergency. When that happens, the governor's powers are extended to keep people safe. And that's state statute. I think it's like 323.66 subsection 4H or something. I can't remember, but it's in state statute and it's easy to look up if people have questions about it and want to see the exact language. Some people are interpreting that as the ability to take exactly that action, especially with guidance from the health department or from designee Secretary Palm. So the governor has said that he does not believe, or his legal team has suggested he does not have those powers. and so have the Republican legislative leaders who control the Assembly and the Senate, who are on the other side of the party because he's a Democrat. So it's possible there could be a last-minute action taken, I suppose, but I think this was kind of more of a Hail Mary, last-ditch efforts by a bunch of mayors, including Tom Barrett here in Milwaukee, who are really who are kind of at their wits' end with this and really don't think it's a good idea to do in-person voting in this fashion. So in other words, I don't think it's very likely, but it is possible. And I've had lawyers tell me who know constitutional law and know state statute better than I do, because that's their training. I've had them tell me that they think it could be interpreted that he does have this power, but again, the governor has publicly stated otherwise. So he called for a special session, which is basically kind of an advisory move asking the folks who control the chambers in the Assembly and Senate to take action. They, in no uncertain terms, even within hours, actually declined that very specifically. So the last possible action will be up to him as the executive of the state.
Thank you. We covered this, but just for clarification, I'll just ask this question. It's a little different. This person has requested an absentee ballot multiple times and has not received one in the mail. So the question is, do they have any other option to vote except for to go in person?
So it's possible your ballot could still get to you. And I would call the election commission of whatever municipality you're in and double check. Because if it gets to you, you're good to go, and you can always, and even if you don't want to mail it back, you can drop it off. I know that they've been deluged with an incredible amount of work lately, and they're well past capacity. So stuff has taken longer. Mine took much longer than it normally would to get to me. I did the same option, and I requested fairly early on, as did my wife. Ours both took a long time. So I would call, but again, if you, and I'm not necessarily advocating for this, but if you choose to to vote in person, you will not be punished for having one mailed to you as long as you don't fill that 1 hour. You can only vote once, but you don't forego your right to do it in person if you so choose.
Agree.
So we're getting close to our time here. I think let's wrap up with some final thoughts from you and the question that I have, as this is very fluid, as we've said, and there's some potential that it might change a little bit. What is the best resource or place for folks to go tomorrow, right before they leave to vote, to see if anything has changed? Should they be watching the news? Should they be going to certain websites? What are your thoughts around that?
I think they should first check the website of their local clerk. So whichever municipality, city or village that you live in.
Yes.
Secondly, if it's unclear from that, then a call. But I would be careful of other sources that could be outdated.
I agree. That's totally right. And Theo, as usual, is perfectly on point. There is a lot of fluidity to this situation and a lot of changes going on very quickly. And therefore, there's people who, even without malicious intent, and I know this because I've seen it today and I've been contacted a bunch about it today, are spreading information that's not necessarily the case. And therefore, again, the people who will have the agency over how this is being executed, administered at the base level, are your municipal, are the folks who are handling this election, the election commission. So I would go with them. If you have any questions or any problems with it or anything like that, you can always use me as a backup. You can call me. My office is being rerouted because I don't have my staff there in person, or you can Facebook me through my rep page or whatever, and I'm happy to field anything or help in any way that I can. But I would first off recommend going to your municipal election commissioner, because they're the ones who are ultimately in charge.
Mm-hmm. There's a question about how in Milwaukee, how the 5 voting sites were chosen. I'll read it the way they wrote it. were the City of Milwaukee voting sites chosen by their convenience and accessibility to as many residents as possible? If not, what criteria were used? And if you can't answer that question, who can they talk to find out the answer to that?
So I don't know the answer. I would assume that it was chosen by the Election Commission for the City of Milwaukee. I assume that they evaluated a number of factors, including accessibility, but also capacity of those facilities. You know, what's their ability to move people in and out safely. And I would, you know, after this is over, you could talk with your alderman, or I'm sure there will be all kinds of discussion publicly about what happened and postmortem on all this. But those are questions for after tomorrow, you know, because there's so much more that has to happen today and tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that assessment's correct. It's my understanding that it was chosen by the Election Commission. Accessibility, geography, the state of the buildings themselves, the ADA accessibility. You know, there were a couple different criteria that had to be met, but that's something your alderperson can follow up with, or possibly the Election Commission when there's a little more time. But I know I will say this: I've gotten a lot of complaints about that, especially in different parts of the city, who are very upset. But I although I don't have any purview or any ability to influence that decision or how it was made or how that there were 5 sites or how the 5 sites are chosen, I would say that there's no perfect, you know, there's no perfect answer here. I don't think that it could have been. I think that the situation as is set up right now with in-person voting during a global pandemic like this is flawed from the jump, and therefore any decision made that's an extension of that will by its nature be flawed. And that's why I think the legislation have to be all mailed in, and that's why I think we should be doing that. But that's my opinion.
Yep.
So
okay.
call your state representative and tell them to support support a fix, whether it's Brostoff, Representative Brostoff's bill or some version of that, or do your own version. But I mean, bottom line, we shouldn't be trying to figure out this sort of thing on the fly. And now that we've been through it and seen what a mess it can be, there ought to be a better solution ahead of time rather than on the fly. So, you know, one of the things that we were concerned about was if there had been a delay, that there would have been vacancies in office. So, for instance, County Board Supervisors, we served through April 19th, the same as the exec who serves through May 3rd. And so had the elections been delayed longer than that, there would have been these vacancies, and there was nothing in current law to provide for that. And so the governor had he had that as one of the fixes, but it's all those sorts of elements that need to be thought through in terms of having a process in place for what happens if an election is delayed, but even better, to provide a process that would avoid the need to have hundreds of facilities open when you're giving all this guidance out, telling people not to gather, to then pull thousands of people into one spot is obviously, I don't know what the word is.
Well, and again, I don't even think we had to have a delay. I think there could have been an extension where we let everyone vote, but we just held it open, and logistically, for logistical purposes, everyone could have gotten mailed it. Every eligible voter that had not yet participated, and they could have gotten it mailed back. And we can do this. We have other states that do this. The precedent is there. The majority of the Republicans who control the Assembly and the Senate completely disagree and dismiss that on a hand. That's something we've been working on and calling for well over a month now. And now that you know, we're seeing what it's going to look like. But again, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, 9/11 was horrible. 2,977 innocent souls in one day. This is well over 10,000 innocent people died. It's going to continue, and it's not just one day. This is really big and bad, and you know, we need everyone to do their part, including elected officials, regardless of what party they're in or whatever they think about that stuff.
Okay. What is your recommendation for folks that have a strong opinion, about how this has been handled? How would you suggest that they have their voices heard about how this is going in terms of the election tomorrow?
Well, I think it's mostly at the state level that those changes have to be made. And, you know, so while I think elections are important, I also think that democracy is participatory. So after you vote, whether you voted for the person or didn't, they are your elected official, and you need to follow up with them on issues. And so state representatives and senators are going to be on the ballot in fall. We don't know what kind of election we're having there. In fact, they've got to start circulating their nomination papers. That's going to be the next problem, is how are candidates supposed to circulate nomination papers while in a stay-at-home order? Who's opening up their door
Right.
to a canvasser to sign a nomination paper on April 15th, which is when candidates start circulating for fall offices. So anyway, it's a little aside, but yeah, follow up with your elected officials, but after tomorrow. So much more to do in the next day.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would say that, yeah, Theo's totally right. This is completely at the hands of the state. And I think that there's a couple things that should happen. One is you have avenues through social media where everyone can post your thoughts, and you can kind of publish your own thing, and information has been small d democratized in that way. Two, I would highly recommend writing an op-ed and submitting it to, you know, we have new papers like Wisconsin Examiner, Up North News, Urban Milwaukee, etc., that are willing to take submissions, even if the Journal Sentinel will not anymore. So I'd recommend that, and even getting on the radio. And three, I would, whatever your thoughts are, if you agree with me, you disagree with me, let me know, let everyone know. This in some way can be a clarion call to how important it is to have responsive, transparent, appropriate, and responsible government at every level, especially the state, and what can happen without that even. And, you know, it's Theo makes a good point. Like, you know, I'm, as someone who's in a partisan office, I'm going to be up for, because Theo's nonpartisan, that's the race we're having now. But after this cycle, as Theo said, come April, we're going to be circulating. So I'm in that situation. And what are we to do? Like, are we going to, you know, how are we going to get that done? Maybe there's an online version. But I'll tell you this, the same politicians that were unwilling to make things work, to make it work for the people to be safe, are very likely for themselves going to find a way to make it to be safe for them. You know, how ironic is that? Go riddle me that. You know what I'm saying? Why is that? You know, why is it for me and not for thee? You know what I'm saying? So I think people got to be called to the mat for that. I think it should be, you know, people, you know, let people know. And you always got to yell out about a sellout. And ultimately, regardless of what someone's title is or what position they have or what, you know, clothes they wear, stuff like that, ultimately your elected officials work for you. You are the employer. We are the employees. And that's how it works. And therefore, if we're not doing what you think we should be doing, you got to let us know. Or if you have other ideas what should be happening, let us know as well. And there's no reason why there shouldn't be regular, and in some cases, very loud communications with those who work for you, like myself.
Amen, brother.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you both for your help with this. I mean, obviously, people, if you still have questions, contact the election commission. You know, be prepared to contact the election protection or ACLU if you need to. Tomorrow, do as much research as you can to make sure this is easy for you, that you're arriving at the right places, that you can kind of get through as easy as possible, and protect yourself to the extent that you can. Mask, gloves, stay healthy. Theo and Jonathan, thank you so much for your leadership and your willingness to always inform folks and have us empowered, as empowered as possible.
Appreciate you. And thanks for all the work you do, Cordial. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks to everybody on the call. We are going to go ahead and release this recording. If you know folks that weren't able to be on this webinar, We'll share the recording with you. You can share it with them. Thank you for being here, and please spread the news and the information that you learned. Bye-bye.